actually when we began the training in what's called the Strengthening Families series. These trainings are provided by a grant through First Five, and this was our first one that we provided. It's in the area of child development. Okay, so I really started with this because I wanted the staff to understand that we received this grant, and then ongoing we would be providing trainings in the areas of parenting, information, education, and also in the areas of child abuse and prevention, all under this grant. So I wanted them to understand where it was coming, okay? The goals under the grant being that we wanted to provide education and awareness to our own staff, who in turn will be able to use what information we have as resources, and then also they'll be able to, if the program directors want to do this, they'll be able to actually construct their own workshops with parents, providing parenting education, and also around the area of child abuse prevention. Okay, so it was a way of giving information to the staff and then transferring it to the client, essentially. Okay. Areas to be included, if I can remember all of them offhand. Again, there's the two broad categories of a parenting education series, which you're going to get the first one today, that's child development and parenting styles. Today we're going to cover. But also the other category is child abuse prevention. And we do have curriculums under each of these categories, which you've been getting. You guys were making up some of those trainings, but we talked about types of abuse, history of abuse, remember prevalence, all of that. Those were some of the areas. We're going to be talking about resources regarding for child abuse prevention. We're going to be getting more into the detail of the process, what happens when you make a report, what type of feedback can you expect, but getting much more into the nuances of the reporting process than we did with the earlier training you got. And let's see. And under the parenting series, it's basically been more so talking about, if you remember, we talked about problem behavior, discipline, punishment. We talked about learning theories. Hopefully all that will register. So if you want really a rundown of the curriculum, I don't know if we really made that available to you guys, but you can probably ask Laura for that. Okay. There's 4 trainings under the category of child abuse prevention, and there's 5 under the parenting. Okay, but it is a great deal of information that's collapsed into each of those trainings. Okay, for today though, we're going to be reviewing child development milestones, 0 to 6 ages. That is our target group of concentration. We're going to be talking about temperament. What is meant by that word? You may have heard that about a child's temperament as it relates to parenting. And then we're going to be talking about parenting philosophies and styles of parenting that have come out of research. Okay, so it doesn't mean it's, all inclusive of every single parenting style, but it's just some research that was able to identify particular styles. Okay. Any questions about this? So you guys know what you're getting today. Okay. Now, even though our focus is on 0 to 6, I teach a class at Cal State actually right now. We're just going to be ending next week. They have finals next week, but it's on human development, specifically older adults. So I'm more used to talking about older adults, but some of these actually just apply, period. Genetics and environment interact, okay, to cause developmental change. So I'm sure many of you have heard stories of children who did not get proper stimulation, and so that actually would stunt development in certain developmental areas. So we know that the environment and certain types of stimulation is very important for development to occur. Okay, so it very much is an interplay between the two. And even though you give out a lot of age ranges for developmental milestones, you still need to keep in mind, and particularly with our children, there's a lot of age variations, quite a bit. In fact, adolescence is sometimes, one, and we're not going to get there here, but a lot of times people get very concerned, that maybe they have an adolescent who hasn't fully developed and they're 15. There's a lot of ranges with that. We see people up until 17, 18, 19, still growing and developing. So again, it's an interplay between genetics as well as environment. We have age ranges that are within the norm. That just means it's average. But there's always individuals that fall outside the extremes, right? That may be earlier in development or later. And you've heard children, stories of children walking and talking prior to what is average. And you definitely have heard stories of children that are on the other end, okay, that are not within the norm. And what we know about children with disabilities is that they will vary greatly in all the domains that we'll be reviewing. Okay, so that's, and in particular, what we know of visually impaired children, they will also be below what is norm in terms of all the developmental domains. Vision plays a huge part in development. And is there anything we can do to enhance and promote healthy development? And that we're going to toss some things in at the end. Yes, there is. Okay. And in fact, many of the tools and the things that you see on TV and the media, things that are marketed towards children oftentimes are to enhance development in certain areas. Motor development, cognitive development. Okay. The reason we have preschool and some of these other very early learning programs is part of that. Okay, so what areas are we talking about? Physical and motor development, sensory and perceptual development, so covering our senses, cognitive development, language development, and social and emotional development. Bless you. Okay. Now again, just kind of telling you what we had from our earlier training, we went into a great bit of detail about states of alertness. One time in our history, it was thought that basically infants, their behavior was not meaningful. It wasn't purposeful in any way. So they'd be flinging their arms, looking about, but basically it didn't amount to anything. It wasn't really meaningful, and that's what people at the time thought. Since around the 50s, 60s, it's really been studied in detail. In fact, there was an individual, and I forget which university he was at, but it was in the 60s, that he decided to really observe infants and study these different phases, what he thought phases, but later was termed states of alertness, that the infant goes through. Okay, and as we know, there's periods of wakefulness, sleepiness. If you think about an infant, most of the time they're sleeping, right? Most of the day. But there's periods of time when they're very active and engaged with the caretaker, okay? And we need to be aware of this because those are periods when a lot of actually learning can take place. And even though it may not be something that's observant to the person that's interacting with them, we definitely know that learning is taking place, okay? So there's, I'm not going to get into it here, but again, with our earlier training, there's 6 states of alertness. We went through each of them. There's some that are very important for learning, for different skills to be acquired and for learning to occur. Okay, so I just want you to know that no longer do we feel that the activity of the newborn is just random. It's very purposeful. Okay, it's important that they are looking around, that they are moving their arms, okay? And we all also know that there's reflexes, right? Okay, and we went into a great deal of detail about the many, many reflexes that are observed in the newborns, many of which extinguish under a year. Okay, so within a year we don't see many of them. In fact, many of them disappear within a few months. But why do we have these? Okay, they seem to be pre-wired. Okay, so researchers have looked at that, and again, they're very important for survival. And if you've ever studied anything on like evolutionary psychology, a lot of this comes into play. The rooting reflex. Any idea what that is? Yes.
Where you stroke the cheek and the child will move towards.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Why do you think that's, why would that be of value for the infant?
So the child will be able to feed, will be able to locate the breast, the nipple.
Yes, so did everyone hear? Okay, so the rooting reflex, when you're stroking the child's cheek, you want the infant, I should say, the infant to turn towards that object to feed. In fact, that's the intent there. Okay, and we see that with all infants. It doesn't matter which culture, which country, we see this reflex with human beings, right? And again, for the purpose of directing towards the feeding object, okay, whether it be the bottle, whether it be the breast, right, they need to feed. Palmar and Moro, have you heard of those? You know, it's kind of fun to put your finger to the little infant and they squeeze it really hard. pretty good, you know, grip strength, right? Even with a little infant, okay, Palmar, okay, has to do with that, okay, where they squeeze the finger. Now, evolutionary psychologists believe, and again, you may not believe this, that at one time that was needed. You know, that was needed to hang on to, whether it be trees, whether it be our mother, but we needed to have that. And so it was an automatic reflex. And this is something that is not thinking, it's just it's a trigger for the child to do this behavior, for the infant. Moro reflex, that's very important. That's also called the startle reflex. So that's when you see a flexion of the arms and the legs, they go out. So if you slam the door and the little infants are laying on the bed, it'll go like this. Okay, with both the legs and the arms going out, and then it usually retracts and goes back in. So sometimes they call it the embrace reflex or the startle reflex. But it's very significant because if an infant doesn't do that, something could be wrong with its nervous system. In fact, most of the time something is wrong with its nervous system. Okay, which is why actually doctors very quickly check for all these reflexes. They're very significant. And again, many of them disappear within the first few months. Okay, COBs are congenitally organized behaviors. That's a mouthful. And these are important because they seem like reflexes, but they're more than reflexes. Okay, there seems like there's actually some more organization to these. There's more involvement. Sucking, there's a lot involved in sucking. Okay, with the tongue and the jaw and the mouth, there's a lot more involved in that type of behavior which infants do very naturally, right? And crying. There's a lot involved in crying as well, and same with looking. And at one time, you know, these behaviors were deemed as just kind of random, not meaningful. But actually, we know they're quite significant and very valuable, and very much tied into our survival, right? Looking, there's a lot of information when we're looking about, which is why we know vision is so important for acquiring further development, which is why we see the children that don't have vision being underdeveloped in many areas. Crying, why is crying significant? Why would that be significant?
It's a way that they have their needs met when they're an infant, to let them know that parents really need something.
Yeah, it's not to irritate the parents as much as the parents. And there's been a lot of research on cries and types of cries. And actually we got into a lot of that research with the first training as to what the cries signify. However, the bottom line is just what you said, that the cries actually are letting the caretakers know that the infant is in need of something, whether it be nourishment, right, tending to in some way. So we really aren't able to verbalize in words at that point. The infant can't get up and move around, so this is a mode of behavior that we can actually get someone to come and meet our needs.